Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I put this on Twitter a little while ago, but like according to the left, like almost everything is incomparably complex and requires years of graduate study.
Right.
Poverty, race,
Math,
gender,
2 plus 2.
math. Yeah, everything is incredibly complex. Drug addiction, except Israel-Palestine.
Huh.
That takes about 2 minutes of study, and every high school sophomore is an expert. And there's the good side and the bad side, and that's all there is to it. And they don't even want to hear you talk. Like that's what, Macklemore, the rapper, he was at that rally the other day. He said, he's like, oh, they told me it was complex. They said I had to study. Well, I did study, and now I know this is genocide.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I don't know. I mean, are they a people? Sure. I mean, are the North Macedonians a people? Okay. Are the Pakistan, you know where the name Pakistan comes from?
I do not, actually, no.
It's an acronym.
Really?
Pashtun, Kashmiri, yes.
Mm.
And then Baluchistan, yes, it's an acronym. Sindh. It's not. So, I mean, that's fine. They needed to come up with a name for this region. And so they were like, well, let's take the first letter of the names of a bunch of different tribes, and that'll be the name of the country. All right, now it's a country. There used to be an East Pakistan. Now it's Bangladesh. I mean,
it's like by Pakistan. Maybe that's what the next woke claim will be.
Right.
Yeah, the BIPOC nation. That's really funny. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. And it's that time again. Seth and I are going rogue. Every now and then we seize the reins, seize the means of production, and do a podcast of our own. Seth Barron, managing editor. Nice to see you as always.
It's good to see you too, Spencer.
All right. So we have to begin, I think, by talking about the elections last night. I don't know that we're going to spend a ton of time on this, but there were a bunch of elections Tuesday night. I don't know when listeners will be hearing this episode, but by and large, looks like kind of a lot of wins for Democrats. Not necessarily good news for Biden, as we'll get to in a second, but Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear managed to survive a challenge from Republican Daniel Cameron. In Ohio, although Ohio is a red-leaning state, they passed Issue 1, which put the right to abortion into the state constitution, the latest of many states that have done that. And then in Virginia, Democrats actually flipped the Senate. So this is Glenn Youngkin's Virginia, where they not only kept off a GOP takeover, but they actually flipped the House. Excuse me. The Senate was already Democrat, but now the House is too. All of that in the context of a CNN poll that shows Donald Trump leading Joe Biden. So still not, a day of unmitigated celebration for Democrats, but I don't know, man. They just keep winning. Seth, what do you think? Is this just kind of moderate? Are these just sort of more of the same results? Anything new here that bears mentioning?
Well, the Kentucky result, I mean, look, that guy, Beshear, I mean, he's sort of a moderate Dem, I believe. But you have to remember, his dad was the governor. So he has this name recognition.
Right.
His dad, I guess, was a popular governor. Virginia is disappointing. It's disappointing to the Glenn Youngkin team because they were really thinking that if he were to flip the Senate or the House, which is they wanted to flip the Senate to Republican, then I mean, I think there were people thinking about having him jump into the presidential race, this year.
Right,
But
right, right. Yeah, there's some speculation about that he would do a last minute entry, but
yeah,
that just seems like wish casting to me.
it did.
Yeah.
But so that's obviously not positive. I mean, look, it's sort of clear that, and the thing is, Virginia is a state where the wokeism and the trans stuff in the schools had really gone crazy, and I think a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, this is the year that Virginians are really going to push back. I don't know.
Yeah.
It does seem when I see, like, in Ohio, the abortion getting codified. Ann Coulter, I shared this with you, wrote a piece on her Substack saying that basically abortion is the pro-life is the defund the police of the right.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's from that perspective, it's not, I wouldn't say far right, but the you know the conservative wing of the party has this as as their main cause, but it's just not that popular on a certain level. Um, 50 years of Roe v. Wade conditioned the population to expect abortion, to be able to get it. So, I don't think that the thing is, I don't think that necessarily means anything about for the presidential election,
It doesn't
because
seem to.
no, I mean, I think you can be a sort of a MAGA Republican, a pro-choice MAGA Republican. It's not really a contradiction, is it?
Well,
I
Trump
mean,
is like, I mean, he's all over the place on this issue, but his big gaffe so far is calling DeSantis's abortion restriction bill law a mistake, which I call it a gaffe. But you're right, like the Trump wing of the party is not the same thing as the pro-life wing of the party, much as we might
no,
like it to be.
not at all. And in a way, on the national level, it becomes easier for Republicans because they can say, well, it's a state issue.
Right, right.
Uh, it doesn't. I guess it makes things tough for Republicans at the state level. In some. I mean, I don't know what the governor, what the next governor race in Ohio is going to look like, but
Yeah,
clearly
I mean,
it.
Ann Coulter has this great line in this piece where she says, fellow pro-lifers, this is the change hearts and minds part of the battle, not the force Republicans to keep losing elections part. And I just think, like, I mean, had a change of heart on this too. I was kind of a middle of the road Republican who had the classic line of like send it back to the states, it's a states' right issue, and I have been convinced that at a sort of abstract philosophical non-prudential level, it is the kind of thing that you have to decide sort of nationwide eventually because it's about killing people and it's about who counts as people and all of that stuff. So on that level, it's kind of similar to the slavery question. But I just think Coulter's point is exactly right. Forever conservatives were like, we want to send this back to the states. And then immediately were either totally caught with their pants around their ankles and were like, well, I don't know what we want, or they just sort of went maximalist off the bat. And now if you say, like, look, we have to, even if we want a kind of nationwide amendment on this or something, we've got to work our way to it. You can't just kind of force it down people's throats or you'll lose all power and all chance of ever restricting abortion. If you say that to people, they're like, you're the sort of person that would have compromised with slavery. Like you would have been okay with having slaves in the union. And it's like, yeah, like Lincoln, like that literally was the Republican position. And forcing the issue is what caused the Civil War. Anyway, this is a rant, but like there's a very online thing here where there's a purity spiral going on where it's like you're not really against abortion unless you want to just unless like nothing else matters and you're willing to blow up every election, which look, I get how important the issue is and I have feelings about it that are as strong as any, but it just this strategy does not seem to be working.
No, no, it doesn't. Kind of off topic, but we had an election in New York yesterday, and because the the city council was up. It was sort of like an off year thing because of redistricting.
Yeah.
So I went over to vote. It was like the fastest thing. I look at the sheet and okay, the local council person was running unopposed, but you had the choice of voting for her either as a Democrat or on the Working Families Party line. Then there were some judgeships, like there'd be like three Democrats running for three judgeships, and then two Democrats running for two other judgeships.
Yeah.
And then there were two referenda about, sewage plant debt in like upstate hamlets. And that was it. That was all the voting. It really, I mean, it really felt like I was like, okay, well, this must be what what it was like in the Soviet Union.
Oh no!
You can vote. Yes, do you want to vote for Brezhnev on the CP line or on the the PC line,
Right.
basically? So it was a little funny. It was a little comical.
Right. I think that's
It
what they call
all
manufacturing consent, right? That's like
kind of, yeah. There was an interesting result up in the Bronx
hmm.
where a Democrat was voted out. This Democrat woman, I mean, she's Hispanic, progressive, union type, real standard bearer. And she was voted out, and a Republican woman was voted in. And there hasn't been a Republican in the Bronx in like 50 years elected. So that was interesting, but I would be loath to draw a lot of conclusions about it. It's a weird district, and it's got some peculiarities. Um, namely like a fairly large Italian, a fairly large Albanian population. So there's conservative elements that can sway elections. But it was interesting. It was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not inclined to draw anything about the presidential election from any of these, except the thing that we already basically know about abortion now, which is like, even if like me, you want it banned nationally, like we're just not there yet, and that's not the way to go. So yeah, it just looks increasingly like 2024. Who knows what could happen, but it just looks more and more like it's going to be about vibes, like whose vibes are most strong against Biden or against Trump. And like Trump's out there right now grandstanding in his trial, his debt trial, to try and kind of use it as a political platform, which I think is probably pretty smart. I mean, it's an insane situation that you've got a kind of hated corpse and a despised like business mogul, the hate object of half the nation and all of its commentariat class. But
Yeah.
it's like that's sort of a different and more cataclysmic clash than any of
Mm.
these little races. And I have to feel like the CNN poll is kind of more interesting. I mean, I'm just interested in like how well Trump is doing despite it all.
Well, the
For me to be kind of
New York Times Siena poll showed Trump leading comfortably in 5 of 6 swing states. I mean, they
right.
basically said if the election were today, Trump would have over 300 electoral votes.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, you know where you heard this first was at theamericanmind.org. Dan McCarthy, I think, wrote for us. Am I making this up? We definitely ran a piece called "Yes, Trump Can Win."
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So there you go. It's still an open race, amazingly. But okay, let's leave that behind and let us talk about our rogues gallery of psychopaths. We've got just a bunch of crazy people to talk about. Some especially grim and some just more entertaining. This is current year America, and the Clavin and Barron show is just about like the
Love it.
psychological peculiarities of a nation suffering from some sort of breakdown. First, we got to talk about this manifesto that came out of the Covenant School shooter. Finally, here in Nashville, we had this awful shooting from this girl that identified as trans. We knew she had a manifesto, but the family of the shooter, I think I have this right, the family of the shooter turned ownership legally of the manifesto over to a group of families of children at Covenant School. So basically the family of the perpetrator gave these writings to the families of the victims or representatives of the victims. And they, in turn, seem to be, or some of their representatives, especially this guy Brant Leatherwood, seem to want this out of the public eye. And Leatherwood is like a, he's an anti-gun activist to begin with. So that's kind of how the situation ended up, where we haven't seen this in forever. But it somehow seems to have gotten leaked. It's not yet totally clear that the whole thing has come out. But Steven Crowder, who's a podcaster, obviously people will know him, has put some of this stuff out that is allegedly images of the manifesto. I mean, what to say about these things? They're never like coherent, but the governing thrust of this one seems to be about race and class, which is sort of interesting in itself. I mean, I think everybody wanted to see this because they thought it was going to be a trans thing. Like they thought it was going to be the evil cis heteropatriarchy. And so far it's like, these are quotes, kill crackers with white privileges, kill those kids. There was a prayer to God to let wrath overcome anxiety. So, I mean, just incredibly sick stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, Seth, did this sort of surprise you? To me, it's grimly surprising that this turned out to be about the racial aspects of wokeness rather than the sexual aspect.
Yeah. Although I guess in this decade of intersectionality,
it's a model of intersectional justice.
One. What was the chant? White, black, gays. Oh, gay, straight, black, white. One struggle, one fight. Yeah, I like where Hale, the shooter, said that she hated kids who went to, quote, fancy private schools with those fancy khakis and sports backpacks with their daddy's Mustangs and convertibles. Now, I don't know a lot about this school, but I mean, is it really? I don't know. Usually, like these kind of Christian schools, it's not exactly like. I mean, we're not talking about, uh, um, Miss Porter's school or some like super elite, northeastern prep school.
I mean,
Necessarily.
yeah, like I've visited. Like it is a nice school, and here in Nashville, some of the Presbyterian churches and the church schools more generally are some of the nicer places to go.
Okay.
But your point, I mean, it's not Exeter, right? Like these are not, and this is not exactly a cultural demographic group that wields like irrefutable power in America in 2023.
Right.
Like, yeah, but I mean, look, this is a disturbed girl who probably has some, she's probably talking about like somebody that bullied her and, thinking of some blonde haired kid or something. But
Sure.
I don't know. Yeah, it's insane. But I think your point about intersectionality is exactly right. Like this stuff all kind of blends together in the minds of crazy people.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't really know what to say about it. I feel like anti-whiteness is sort of a big theme in our pages lately, and not just in our pages, but in culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made the point, and other people have too, obviously, that all of this uh, anti-Israel stuff is less anti-Semitic than it is just um, anti-white, really. That in the calculus of the left, Jews are not sub-white, but they're really like kind of uber white.
Yeah.
And that's the way they're viewed by the by basically like the advocates of like non-white supremacy. So, in that sense, I guess it makes sense that this benighted, disturbed soul who couldn't figure out what their gender was and probably had other mental issues, uh, decided to hate white people.
Oh yeah. No, it
You know,
makes perfect sense. It's like, and we've talked about this in the context of other atrocities that were sort of racially motivated. Like any society, especially a sick society, which I think ours kind of is going to have people suffering from all kinds of demented, mental problems, and in my opinion, also like demonic possession and supernatural attacks, and they're
Sure.
going to cast around for whatever hate object is most readily available, suggests itself. And what hate object is more appropriate to latch onto in 2023 than white people, especially white men, but white people in general? Like, I don't know if you saw, there was floating around on Twitter this picture that it was some honors society at some college of just people that had done well on their GPA or whatever, and there were a lot of white people. Maybe it was all white people. I don't know. And the comments were just like, how could they possibly, like, these spiteful cretins? Just like a bunch of white people smiling, right? That's the
Yeah.
the underlying phenomenon here. So
Oh,
yeah,
sure. I mean, I saw a similar thing recently of it wasn't even like an honor society. It was a group of white people at a like at a picnic.
right, right,
Um, there may have been a famous person among them. I don't remember, but they were clearly, and they're all kind of smiling at the camera and holding up their wine glasses or just whatever. It was like, I don't know, 10 or 15 people. But yes, because they're all white, it's like, oh, what's wrong with this picture? It just becomes this moment of mockery,
right.
this instance of mockery, and it's like, well, the country has 350 million people or whatever, um, and about 2/3 of them are white.
Yeah.
And as we're always told, it's a segregated society. So yeah, you go into a lot of places, and almost everyone around is white, and a lot of people, all their friends are white. That's just the way it is. Same way there's a lot of people, I mean, look, even Malcolm X. When Malcolm X, like after he became an Orthodox Muslim and left the Nation of Islam, and he went to Mecca on the Hajj,
Yeah.
like he saw that there were Muslims of all shades, and he said, but when he came back and he saw that, oh well, like these people, these Muslims were all hanging out together, and these Muslims were all, and he said, look, under conditions of perfect equality, people tend to self-segregate.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that's whatever, but there's a certain truth to it,
Totally.
and you know, so but definitely that our culture is riven by this, and it's really there's such like a midwit level of criticism where like you don't have anything else to say, so the first thing you do is point out that everyone involved in something is white.
Yes.
Therefore, it's not very good.
Well,
Therefore,
absolutely.
it's corrupt.
I mean, it is the least to your point and to Malcolm X's point, I guess, or whatever. It's so basic. It's so obvious that people have like hang out with people that look like them and are like them, that it it really actually doesn't tell you anything. Like it's sort of the baseline assumption. We all know this happens, and since it's been made into a crime for one group of people, now it has become this sort of bizarre thing that you can just attack anybody, any white person you can attack for like hanging out with other white people. Um, this podcast is now going to become just sort of you and I one upping each other on like how terminally online we are and how we're constantly feverishly scrolling through these bizarre corners of the internet. But I will now play my part in the game by saying that I was scrolling through like Instagram's version of TikTok. They now have reels where you
Yeah.
watch these little videos, and it served me up these two videos in succession that I was just thinking of as you were talking. The first of which was, I get a lot of music because I like choral music and stuff, and so this was just a group of people around a piano singing a gospel song, and it was like all black people except for these two white singers. And
Mhm.
I, in my like squishy lib way, like the part of inside me, the classical liberal that won't die, I was like, oh, that's so nice. Like, look at this like one white person, like, just hanging out and singing this gospel music with these black people. And indeed, it was like kind of cool, because actually this is fine, whatever. Like nobody would be mad about all these black people and this one white person, whatever. And then I scroll on to the next video, and it was this woman, hugely viral video and she had taken an advertisement for Sesame Street musical with the count, whatever, the count that counts numbers, the purple
Yeah.
guy. And the slogan was "Embrace your baddie side." It was a pun on bats.
Right.
And she's laughing like, you know, just that this is the most absurd and embarrassing thing they could possibly have done. All these people commenting about how ridiculous this is. And I'm like, what's going on? She goes, you guys didn't have one Jamaican or Afro-Caribbean or Haitian person on your team? And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I go and look it up. Apparently, baddie is a Jamaican, like an obscure Jamaican slang for gay person, essentially.
Oh, right. Okay.
So once you know this, you can sort of see why, if you were from this microculture, this extremely obscure, like, but it's like
Right.
you're
Right.
in America. Like people speak
Yeah.
English here, and baddie means like we're not being weird and lame. Like you are
Right.
obscure. Like,
Right.
but anyway, so this thing where you're not allowed to have any like white, sort of European culture has now just become like the accepted thing. And I don't know, it has to result, doesn't it? Like it's going to result in people being like, well, in like white racial awareness. I mean, this people have been calling for this forever, but like, isn't that going to happen? I mean, I hate the idea of it, but like, it just seems like inevitable that people are going to respond to this with like, well, great, you hate white people, like we love white people and only white people, and like that just seems
Well, I
inevitable.
mean, that's the thing, is that that a lot of these cultural identities, as has been, pointed out by sociologists and all kinds of people for decades, centuries, these identities are largely formed through outside pressure. They're
Mm,
oftentimes negative identities.
yeah.
So, you know, African Americans, because we had the one drop rule, blacks became this category. You could make the argument about Palestine. I mean, you could make the argument of, Jean-Paul Sartre said about Jews.
Yeah.
Like Jews were defined as this other, and then they became that. Palestinians, look, you can make a very good argument that Palestinian identity didn't exist prior to, the formation of the state of Israel and their, unfortunate exodus or expulsion or whatever you want to call it. But look, you can't say they're not an identity now. They are. There
Right.
is a Palestinian people, even if historically speaking it didn't really exist. Now there is one.
Hmm.
Similarly, there's people who call people like white people who think they are white. Like I think Ta-Nehisi Coates like to say that.
Right.
It's very arch. And the idea is like, look, there's no such thing as white. That's why we don't have to capitalize it. Okay, there's Irish Americans, there's Polish Americans. Well, you know what? If you're going to keep up this anti-whiteness stuff, you are going to create a group of people who do think of themselves that way.
That's such a good
Uh,
point. Yeah, and it's so human. Like as you're talking, I'm thinking about, okay, so right, I have like significant but not like determinative Jewish heritage, right? My dad's side of the family is Jewish,
right.
and I'm a Christian. And I would like, I have a scholarly interest in Hebrew and Judaism. I have plenty of Jewish friends, whatever. But I would never like self-define as Jewish. But you're right. Like now that all of this, crazy stuff is going on, not just the Hamas massacre itself on the 7th, but also just the local kind of Jew hatred that has
Mhm.
emerged into the world. All of a sudden, I'm like, hell yes, I'm Jewish. Like, and up yours, like there's definitely just this natural reaction to like claim the part of your identity that's being attacked. And yeah, I mean, people are not all that invested in their, like, nobody's all that invested in his whiteness if left to his own devices. People care about being Italian or Irish or whatever.
Mhm.
But now there's this thing where you have to go around being like, it's okay to be white. Like I like being white. And it's like, I don't know,
Right.
do I? Like but yeah, they sort of force the issue. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, sort of conversely, I mean, I guess in New York, I mean, if I leave New York and go out to like, the hinterlands,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm necessarily like whatever. I kind of have an olive skin tone, kind of a I mean, I even though my family is completely Ashkenazi,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we really are Levantine because that's the cast of that's what I look like. Like I can pass as an Arab very easily or whatever. Um, but and I've never really thought of myself as, oh, I'm white particularly, but I guess I mean that's clearly where I'm placed. I'm certainly not placed like as a non-white,
Right. Right.
except by, maybe like white supremacists.
Huh.
I mean, I did read someplace like white supremacists, they define non-white as anyone less white than they are.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's that dimension of it for sure, and like, right, but
Whatever.
yeah,
It's a strange thing. It's unfortunate, but this is look. I think they this was all predicted decades ago that if you're going to
yeah,
create an affirmative action system and a caste system, you're going to wind up putting people into forcing the emergence of a white identity.
yeah. No, I mean, this is the sort of thing that when you talk about it, everybody's like, "Well, that means you're a white supremacist, like you want white politics." It's like if you say that if you say that snow comes when it's cold and there's precipitation in the air, does that make you like a snow supremacist? Like this is sort of people have just been predicting that this is going to happen, and
You
yeah,
know what? I think that's actually a very good metaphor because it really is a question of precipitation. It's like you have this massive people,
right,
and if you put the right amount of pressure on them,
right.
then this identity will precipitate. So I think that's a good metaphor.
Thanks. I want to go back to this thing about the Palestinians though that you said kind of in passing because we should talk about Hamas as well and like all
Sure.
of that. Um, I've been seeing this map passed around all the time now about how the Palestinians have been forced out of their territory basically.
Right.
And it's like, here's the 19 I'm going to get these dates wrong, but it's like here's the 1947 borders and here's the 1986 and here's now and whatever, and the Palestinian territory gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But this is like, the first map is like the British, you know, protectorate or whatever that was carved
Yeah.
out, and this has always been kind of a created. I mean, in on some level, the notion that that area is Palestine dates back to an ancient effort to like shame and exile the Jews, right? Like the
Yeah.
Romans put that name on that area because they wanted to effectively say it belongs to the Philistine, to your like tribal enemies, basically.
Right.
Um, and so now it would seem that Hamas and like the really the global left has created this people group out of nothing, but it certainly is. Do you think it's like more of a global slash Western phenomenon than an actual indigenous Middle Eastern group?
What, the Palestinians?
Yeah, or like Palestine as a political cause.
Look, it's a postmodern thing. I
Mm,
mean, it's totally postmodern. It didn't exist before, and now it does exist. And it exists in a sense that you can't really deny its existence. But then the question is trying to root it in the um, in the discourse of indigeneity kind of doesn't make that much sense.
right.
Um, I mean, if you want to get into it, like a lot of at the time, the Ottoman Empire and during the Mandate, there were no borders, so people could move wherever they wanted. So, Jordanians and Egyptians and Syrians would move down there because the Jews were there, and there was the economy was better, and there was a lot of work. That I guess that makes them indigenous in a way that Jews who've been there for a very long time aren't. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think with these maps, I mean, look, we're dealing with people who are operating in bad faith,
Mm,
incredibly bad faith. They oftentimes they don't understand the history. They don't care to understand the history. Like, I put this on Twitter a little while ago, but like, according to the left, like almost everything is incomparably complex and requires years of graduate study.
right.
Um, Poverty, race, gender,
Math, 2 plus 2.
math.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is incredibly complex. Um, drug addiction, except Israel Palestine.
Huh.
That takes about 2 minutes of study, and every high school sophomore is an expert. And there's the good side and the bad side, and that's all there is to it.
Hmm.
And they don't even want to hear you talk. Like that's what Macklemore, the rapper. He was at that rally the other day. He said, he's like, "Oh, they told me it was complex. They said I had to study. Well, I did study, and now I know this is genocide."
Yeah.
Like, okay, um, I don't know. I mean, are they a people? Sure. I mean, are the North Macedonians a people? Okay. Are the Pakistan? You know where the name Pakistan comes from?
I do not actually know.
It's an acronym.
Really?
Pashtun, Kashmiri, yes.
Mm.
And then Baluchistan, yes, it's an acronym. Sind, it's not. So, I mean, that's fine. They needed to come up with a name for this region. And so they were like, well, let's take the first letter of the names of a bunch of different tribes, and that'll be the name of the country. All right, now it's a country. There used to be an East Pakistan. Now it's Bangladesh. I mean,
It's like
so
it's like by Pakistan. Maybe that's what the next
BIPOC.
woke claim will
Right,
be.
right, 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 right.
Yeah, the BIPOC nation. That's really funny.
So there's like this element. There is this postmodern element. I mean, we all know that nation states are a relatively recent innovation.
Right.
I mean, 150 years ago, and you told somebody in Naples and somebody in Milan that they were part of this, or Venice that they were part of the same nation, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? We don't even speak the same language." Um, but then there's the Risorgimento, and the same thing in Germany. I mean, there was what, like 500 principalities. Um, so I mean, this whole thing about or look at Indonesia or any of these places. Um, it's this is all a part of the modern age, basically, and
Yeah.
these identities are you know, they come into being and that's what they are. So, yeah, I'm not going to say that the Palestinians should be scattered like dust because they're not a real people. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Obviously, there are people that, as they keep yelling at us.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, there's an interesting case to be made, and we talked about this a little bit last week with the whole Christian nationalism feature that we were doing. That actually the concept of the nation is not even Western, it's like European and doesn't even fit comfortably in America's own conception of itself. Because as you rightly point out, like the whole project is sort of conceived around the 19th century as an effort to like formalize political borders around pre-existing linguistic groups. And there's a
Right.
million different little sub parcels that are brought together under the heading of France or Germany or whatever. But by and large, you're like, there's sort of an ethnic relationship here that you can discern, and there's a linguistic, there's a shared language, and we're gonna like adopt a cultural mythology, and we're gonna put that in place. Yay, borders, and that's not exactly what America is. Although, of course, like Americans do share a language, we also have this kind of almost imperial sort of impulse to us that we've always been pushing out west and conquering more and bringing
Absolutely.
together. So there's that dimension, but it's also like these nations that we think of in the Middle East too are products of kind of English, mostly British, like state formation and taking this like stamp of a political solution to Europe's problems and kind of imposing it onto these like tribal warring states in the middle of in the Middle East. Like, uh, it's totally unclear that that has anything to do with what's going on over there either. And like, yeah, I mean, nobody seems to want the only people that seem to want the Palestinians like erased or wiped off the map or like genocided or whatever. The only people who seem to want that are Hamas. Like Hamas seems perfectly happy to like have as many of these civilian deaths ostensibly on the hands of Israel as possible so that they can continue to like gin up the Western press against Israel. I don't know, like you were sending me these crisis actors or these guys on TikTok that are like weeping over supposed dead bodies, and then the next moment they're laughing and they're just like, all over the place, kind of creating content for Western
Right.
observers. It sort of feels like it's that way all the way down. Like, does most of what we're watching seems like that at this point.
It sort of does. I just want to say what you were saying about the definition of the United States as a nation.
Mm,
I believe it's the case that there are only two nations in history that were set up in the same way that politically it can expand everywhere, like
mm,
constitutionally. We could make Guam a state. We can
right.
make
Yeah.
different things, but also the USSR worked that way.
Huh.
Like you could, like
Right.
basically any place in the world could become a Soviet Socialist Republic
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
be included theoretically. Like I think there was a brief period of time where Hungary, right after World War I, became like the Hungarian SSR, like before the USSR had even finished its civil war.
Yeah.
And it
Wasn't
was
that
only,
Bela Kun or whatever?
yeah, Bela Kun,
Yeah.
right? So for like 11 months or something before it fell apart. But theoretically, I mean, that is kind of, I always thought it was one of the funny ways in which the US
Hmm.
and the Soviet Union kind of mirrored each other.
That's
That,
so interesting. I mean, yeah, because like, wasn't this a big point of contention between like Trotsky and some of the other Marxists, like Stalin? I think
yeah,
are we going to fully communize Russia, or are we going to sort of mobilize the global proletarian revolution?
right. And Stalin just wanted to focus. He's like, we've got enough empire right here.
Yeah, yeah, enough to be dealing with, but
Yeah.
yeah, but in principle, like the premises of both countries are kind of universalist, right? That,
Yes. Yes.
that both about things that should apply everywhere and always to everyone. It doesn't mean that like to be an American, you have to think that everybody should become American tomorrow, but like the ideas in the Declaration are ideas about people, full stop. And similarly, the ideas in the Communist Manifesto are also about people, full stop. So
Well,
they,
that's why, I mean, America is kind of like a communist country in that way. I mean, look what we're doing with the border. And basically, the assumption with the border is that everybody in the world is already an American. We're just letting them come home. I
Hmm.
mean, really, the next step should just be not to turn the rest of the world into the United States, but just grant citizenship to everyone in the world.
Yeah, who do I know of that sort of did that once upon a time? Oh, I remember that was the Romans. They did. I mean, didn't the Romans like endow millions of people with citizenship all of a sudden under one of their emperors? I'm going to forget which one and lose my classes bona fides. But yeah, I mean, look, like this being a Claremont podcast, we should note that there are, I think, robust and totally legitimate readings of the founding documents that do not enjoin like a
Oh,
global
absolutely.
American state, but certainly the distorted and corrupted version of these natural right principles that is currently being invoked is an attempt to like make that case. You're right. Like these things, if these rights adhere to humans, qua humans per se, the sort of borderless argument goes, why not? Why aren't all of those people immediately deserving of all of these political privileges? The answer being that in the first line, right, that this is why governments are ordained and established. Like the people choose to make a government to protect these rights, not necessarily to protect the rights of everyone in the world. Anyway, I'm digressing and footnoting here at this point. But yes, like there is this sort of bloated and partial understanding of American rights talk that would just say you're basically already an American because being an
Yeah.
American is just having human rights essentially.
Well, what's funny? Okay, so the other day, one of these groups, speaking about Hamas, one of these groups, and there's a million of them, not in our name, or if not now,
Right.
or Jewish, Jews for racial and economic justice. Okay, they went and took over Liberty Island, I guess yesterday, and they, where the Statue of Liberty is, and they all put on these T-shirts that said "Not in our name" or whatever, and They put banners out saying, like, free Palestine, peace, ceasefire now, all that stuff. And it just seemed like such a weird confusion of symbols and meaning. Like, why this? Okay, and they claimed that they were all Jewish, but I don't even think most of them are. They're like, Jews came to the statue. What does the Statue of Liberty have to do with Gaza?
What
What
indeed? Yeah.
what do Jews have to do? How does the statue of how do Jews have a special relationship to the Statue of Liberty? Oh, because some of their grandparents saw it.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sorry, but the Emma Lazarus poem, the Statue of Liberty, is not about immigration. I don't care what people say; it's not.
Hmm.
Yes, as Paul Gottfried said in like a piece that we have up of his today. Um, they basically slapped this poem on the plinth.
Yeah.
It has nothing to like Emma Lazarus's poem. It has nothing to do with this. I mean, it happens to be a poem that she wrote, and they put it on the plinth. It doesn't mean that that's what the Statue of Liberty is. So it just seemed like really funny to me. All of this sentimentality that Jews seem uniquely to have that you don't really hear like other like Irish and Italian immigrants don't seem to go on about the Statue of Liberty so much. And the sense that, well, because we got to come here, everybody gets to come here.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
problem. That's the debt. So this ostensibly, supposedly, allegedly Jewish group goes to the Statue of Liberty to stake their claim about Gaza. I mean, it's so stupid. It was driving me crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, okay. So first of all, footnote: it was the Edict of Caracalla that I was thinking of. That
Oh,
like in the 200s A.D. So like really kind of late imperial hours, or at
okay. You
least.
could have asked me. You could have spent 300 years asking me to name that, and I wouldn't have happened.
Listen, this is my one marketable skill.
I know.
But the but the bigger point about the Statue of Liberty, which is actually related to the Edict of Caracalla, is
Oh,
like remember when the Statue of Liberty was crying because Donald Trump or something?
yeah,
This this was this invocation of like the kind of embodiment of initially American independence, right? Initially, it was like this is this land we have this, the French have sort of helped us to create it. And now it's going to be the political entity that protects the natural rights of those within it. And
right,
as you rightly point out, through the kind of progressive era and the Emma Lazarus poem and all that stuff, it becomes this kind of abstracted embodiment of, everybody everywhere is American. And so anything that restricts Americanness to American citizens makes the Statue of Liberty cry. And I think that's
right.
the same thing with the Gaza. That's why this has anything to do with, Israel Palestine or anything of
Well,
that
the
nature.
funny thing about the Statue of Liberty is that the name of it is Liberty Enlightening the World,
Right.
like spreading like freedom and democracy, this beacon of liberty. It's not a lighthouse showing people come here and get liberty. The idea is supposed to be like America is shining the lamp of liberty so everybody else can live in liberty too.
Yeah, like go
Not
get your
like,
own, basically. Like go
yeah,
do
go
thou
get your
likewise.
own, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like not come here.
Right, and she's also importantly not bearing like the imperial insignia, like she's not carrying the fasces or whatever to go
No.
and like nation build elsewhere. Um, yeah, well, okay, let us. We could probably go on about this for the whole show, but I want to give you the chance, Seth, because I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about Buffy Sainte-Marie. Um,
Mm.
you you sent me this lady. I confess, had never heard of this person before. I guess a pop star. Here's the
Okay.
here's,
You want me to just jump in on this?
why don't you? I had some research I was going to do, but please just tell us about Buffy St. Marie.
I mean, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
I think most people probably don't know who Buffy Sainte-Marie is, maybe. Like, I remember her from the 70s, and yeah, she was a pop star, but she's native, right? She's a Native American.
Yeah.
And in the 70s and 80s, she was kind of a big deal. She started out as a folk singer, and she's Canadian. And like she was on Sesame Street for a while. She would come on and talk about Native stuff, and she really leaned into being a Native. I mean, this was a big deal for her. This was like her brand.
Right.
And she was a successful pop star. Um, but the funny thing is, and like I said, she's Canadian, and up in Canada, Native, like we have our issues around like African Americans,
Yeah.
but in Canada, like their big thing is like their native, like their First Nations, their native population, and that's where all of their guilt
Hmm.
is bound up. And she was, she's Canadian, lived up there. I mean, recently they put her on a stamp. She won so many awards. I mean, she's a huge deal
Yeah.
up there, really active in Native issues. Okay, well, the CBC just came out with this documentary. Not only is she not Indian, she's not even Canadian. She's just this Italian girl from like southern Massachusetts. And they proved it. Like they went rigorously through all of the documentation and her birth certificate and all kinds of things,
Oh my gosh.
just proving absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that she's not Indian. She wasn't kidnapped in any kind of effort to civilize the natives or anything like. It was all just made up, and she made this up, I guess, when she was about 20.
Yeah.
And back then, you could probably just get away with saying whatever you want. Like who cared? But anyway, so it's I think it's a big scandal. It just for some reason it just cracked me up so bad. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
you never saw her without and she wasn't wearing like tribal gear.
Right. No, I love it. I mean, it's another entry into one of my favorite political subcategories, which is the same one as includes, Rachel Dolezal, who pretended to be black and then was uncovered, and Elizabeth Warren pretending to be
Sure.
native. But this one is particularly extreme. Like this is a real deep dive, like whole life artificial identity. It does just raise the question, like, if if it's so terrible, and if the natives and the First Nations people are so oppressed, and there's all this enduring discrimination against them and so forth, why do people want to pretend to be them? Like, you would think that if the nation of Canada really was so hideously racist against its marginalized people, the pretending would be going the other way around. Like the natives would be pretending to be white, no?
Well, that's the way it used to work. I
Yeah.
mean, passing was a big thing in America,
Yeah.
but no black person tries consciously to pass as white and deny their black identity anymore.
Right.
I mean,
No.
when was the last time that happened? I mean, I guess like okay, Carol Channing was apparently part black
Okay.
and didn't really make a big deal out of it, but that was she was from like the 40s and
Right.
stuff.
I mean, she's like,
There are cases like that, but now why would anyone try to deny? I mean, it's like you said, it's just the opposite. There's great advantage.
yeah.
This is what Steve Saylor calls the flight from white.
I mean,
So
yeah. Very much to the point of what we were discussing earlier, I think, like how long has this woman been doing this? Like forever,
60
right?
years, yeah.
Yeah. So she really had to. I'm always fascinated by, and I suppose it's an impossible question, but I just want to know what it's like inside the head of a person like that. Like, do you just get in so deep that you can't get out, or do you genuinely at some point start to, like, Rachel Dolezal seems to have really felt as if she had somehow become spiritually black, so it was okay or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't
I
know
guess.
what,
I
but
mean, there are a lot of cases like this. I mean, it's pretty interesting.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know. Like Australia seems to be a few years. Like Australia just passed a law basically saying that it's against the law to question if someone claims to be Aboriginal.
No, really?
So yeah,
That's
and so
interesting.
there's a lot of Aboriginals who, you know, frankly, don't particularly look very Aboriginal,
Yeah.
which Yeah, that's fine. Maybe they are, but I think that there are. It's weird that they passed a law saying like you can't question it. I
Well,
believe
that's
that.
fascinating. Yeah, because like traditionally, if traditionally is the word I want, within these identitarian disputes, like your gender, that is your sexual identity, it requires no verification, and asking for verification is sinful and
Right.
offensive. But your race very much requires bona fides. Like you need to, if you don't talk right, if you don't season your food right, like you're not enough. If you don't vote right, like you might not really be the race that you think you are. So there does seem to be a kind of conflict here between, is identity purely constructed from within, or is it conferred by, state
Well,
apparatus?
if you recall, like Elizabeth Warren, when people were saying like you're like you made this all up, and she's like, well, I didn't make it all up. This is I was told this, so she took a DNA test, which didn't really wasn't very conclusive.
Right.
Um, but then the whole point is like DNA tests, like to prove that you're a Native American, a DNA test doesn't. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with blood quantum, which is this. It's more genealogical than genetic, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like it
Right.
has to do with like do you have a quarter of tribal inheritance from your grandparents or whatever. So just to like Native Americans do not accept the idea of someone saying like, oh, look at my DNA test. It says that I'm X% Native American, therefore I'm Native American. It has to do really with tribal affiliation, family family ties, this sort of thing. With Buffy Sainte-Marie, she actually, she picked some tribe out in Saskatchewan that she claimed she had been kidnapped from and got really into it, and they adopted her. So, yes, she does actually have tribal affiliation through adoption.
Right. Right. Right.
But, look, it's a very confusing type of thing. I urge everyone to look up, there's a video of Buffy Sainte-Marie in the 70s when her folk career had died, basically, and she decided to reinvent herself as a disco person. So she has this strange disco song called Fancy Dancer,
Okay.
where she's talking about he's a powwow prince and a disco king. I mean, it's so silly.
Oh my
It
gosh.
it would just crack you up.
I'm
So I think everyone should look that up.
I'm looking it up right now. I'm scrolling through some real choice imagery here on the
Mm.
interweb.com. Okay. With that, I think the world has simply become too silly for us to continue discussing it. And we must instead invite our listeners to read the damn site. We have a website. It is not silly, although it sometimes is funny. It's called American Mind, americanmind.org. It's where you read cutting edge commentary, and we like to pick an essay or two each week to recommend to you. So my pick this week is called Whether It Is Prudent to Speak of Caesarism. It's by Pavlos Papadopoulos, who has written for us before, although it has been a minute. So nice to have Pavlos back in our digital pages. This is a really clever piece, I think. It is written in the style of a Thomistic question from the Summa Theologia. In other words, it begins with the counterfactual or the negative argument. I'm going to butcher these terms. So any Thomists out there, you can tell me if I'm doing this wrong. But, the Summa always starts with the opposite of what Aquinas is going to argue and then lists all the reasons why that opposite argument seems plausible and then flips it around and answers those objections while providing an answer of its own. So Pavlos has perhaps out of prudential caution approached the issue in this way, which enables him to ask whether it is a good idea for us and other people on the right to be talking about the potential of a tyrannical overthrow of the government. Not, it bears once again repeating, not wishing for that potential to be realized, but acknowledging that potential given our political circumstances and the truisms of political philosophy that we tend to study. Uh, Pavlos makes a great argument for at least talking about this, not for bringing it about, but for discussing. And he does so with a kind of tongue in cheek, and I would even say esoteric degree of irony in the Thomistic format. If you're really into this sort of stuff, click on the link at the part that talks about Noah Webster and enjoy Webster's original pigeon spelling, which we had to edit for clarity in the piece. But it's really good. Okay, Whether It Is Prudent to Speak of Caesarism by Pavlos Papadopoulos. It's on the site now. Seth, what do you got?
Yeah, that piece is brilliant, and I'm proud to be associated with a publication that runs such erudite and witty stuff. The piece I'm going to recommend is somewhat less erudite, but also very pointed and interesting. It's on Bobby Knight, a appreciation of Bob Knight, the Hoosiers basketball coach who died recently. Bobby Knight was, he won multiple NCAA finals, and he was like a great, amazing coach, but he was also really well known for his horrible temper, and he would just berate his players. And, I guess he choked one and lost his job for that, and he would throw chairs and so forth. So, Alexander Riley, who writes for us, kind of does an interesting appreciation of Bobby Knight, where he points out, like, yes, okay, he had this terrible personality, and now he's seen as an example of toxic masculinity. Yet, if you talk to his former players, they largely revere him, and like guys who grew up maybe without a father figure say, well, he taught me everything I needed to know about being a man. And so, yes, he was a mixed bag. He was a tempestuous, angry guy, but at the same time, he gave a lot of people what they needed, which was less praise and more criticism,
Right.
because criticism can, after all, goad you, whereas praise can be something of a soporific. So it's an interesting piece on Bobby Knight by Alexander Riley.
Yeah, it's a cool piece. It's a cool subject. It made me think of Simon Cowell back in the glory days of American Idol, when everybody loved to hate watch Simon's criticism. He would just be really nasty to the people auditioning. And it eventually became clear that we were performing some kind of weird vicarious, like, criticism via Simon, that like we all want to tell people when they're doing badly and not just, praise and dissemble all the time. And because our culture is so quote unquote nice, we can't be mean. And it's sort of interesting to think about Bobby Knight and Simon Cowell in their respective spheres, representing some kind of lost degree of candor and honesty. And that's it, because there's just the two of us. So go read AmericanMind.org. Thank you, as always, for listening to our crazy little podcast. If you want to know more about what the Claremont Institute does, you can visit all of our websites, not just AmericanMind.org, but ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where our sister publication drops. You can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org, and you can donate to support absolutely everything we do at claremont.org/donate. We're always immensely grateful for donations, large and small. Anything you want to kick our way really helps keep the mission going. And the other thing that helps us is if you share this show. So wherever you talk to people in your group chat or online and your on social media, just drop a link and give us 5 stars if you don't mind, or at least keep your bad opinions to yourself. But 5 stars always helps to bump us up the charts on the podcast apps as well. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.